We're going to talk about restaurant lease transfers. For most restaurant business sales, restaurant lease transfers involve the buyer either assuming the seller's lease, which is called a assignment of lease, or negotiate a new lease or extend the existing lease. For financing the acquisition with the SBA loan, you'll have to show a duration of 10 years to be concurrent with the duration of the loan. Let's talk about different ways of transferring lease. Restaurant lease transfers involve a lease assignment on the existing lease. The lease typically spells out the process for assigning the lease and whether any costs are involved. Traditionally, the word assignment indicates that the seller completely transferred their interest, whereas sublease indicated that the seller only transferred part of their interest. Why is this important? Depending on the language of the lease, an assignment could be defined as a partial transfer and that the seller is still liable on the lease should the buyer default. Read your lease carefully to understand what exactly is involved with your lease assignment and whether you continue to remain liable should the buyer default on the lease. Landlords want to be able to pursue as many parties as possible in the case of default when it comes to restaurant lease transfers. Where possible, the seller should negotiate with the seller to remove their exposure from the lease as an assignment, particularly where there are options to renew. The assignment language in a restaurant lease transfer typically gives the landlord control as to who they will approve as the assignee of the lease, with the common provision that the landlord cannot unreasonably withhold their approval. So long as the buyer is creditworthy, has relevant experience, and meets with the landlord's approval, then assignment should transfer. Unfortunately, there are challenging landlords that will use the restaurant lease transfers process to extract concessions, causing frustrations and delays in the business transfer process. This is rather common. Keep a level head during the process and continue to professionally work with the landlord towards a reasonable outcome. While a landlord may try to leverage the situation for additional gain, they also do not want a lawsuit for unreasonably withholding approval in violation of the lease agreement. You may want to consult a real estate attorney regarding your restaurant lease transfers. The actual lease assignment is a relatively simple document. It involves a straightforward statement that indicates the lease is being assigned by the restaurant seller to the buyer. It is also signed by the landlord. About negotiating a new lease. When the lease expired or near expiration, the buyer will negotiate a new lease. Before the buyer meets the landlord, the buyer will need to properly prepare. The buyer should organize the following: comparable market rents, a business plan, relevant restaurant experience, buyer's financial information, any proposed remodeling, building modifications or renovations, any proposed equipment changes, professional and personal references. Types of leases. There are three general types of leases: gross lease, triple net lease, and percentage lease. The gross lease is all inclusive and typically does not involve any other charges. The triple net called the NNN called triple net includes a base rent along with percentage of occupancy charge for common area maintenance, also known as CAM, building insurance, and real property tax. Some leases are only NN, which are two of the additional charges. The percentage lease involves tenant paying the landlord a percentage of sales over base rent. Most restaurants have a triple net lease. The net expenses are charged based on the percentage the unit has in the building complex. So if the restaurant is 5% of the property complex, then the triple net charges to the tenants are 5% of the expenses. Ideally, you want to limit your lease expenses to 6 to 8% of gross sales. Once lease costs near 10% or more of the business sales, the buyer risks not breaking even. In California, paying 10% of gross sales for rent is occurring more frequently due to high growth. Some restaurants can handle a 10% occupancy charge. These are typically restaurants that do a high volume of liquor sales. Due to high rents, some restaurant owners have to get creative and cut back in other areas to be able to turn a profit, such as cutting back on labor via buffet or self-serve fine dining. High rents cause many restaurants to go under, and we have seen too many desperate sellers trying to get pennies on the dollar. Capping costs. Negotiating a new lease will require assertiveness to assure cost containment. When negotiating the lease, the buyer will need to be especially attentive to several factors to cap costs. The first is yearly rent increases. Typically, increases are tethered to the consumer price index, also known as CPI, and range between 2 to 4%. It's a very good idea to lock in these rates to fix the cost of your lease for the duration of the term. Important to negotiate caps on net expenses, otherwise you'll experience increases above normal cost of living expenses. On each type of net, insurance, tax, and CAMs, it's a good idea to cap each in order to avoid oppressive costs. Of particular note, be sure to cap the real estate tax in the case of sale or transfer. When this occurs, the property tax is reassessed to current rates and will cause the expense to balloon. Limit the real estate tax to exclude any price adjustment due to transfer or sale increases. If the buyer negotiates a percentage lease, then the cap should be 5 to 6% of yearly sales and a below market base rent. Additionally, on a percentage lease, the buyer should assure that there is a recapture provision to deduct triple net expenses from what was paid on the percentage of sales, so that the percentage is adjusted and the tenant can recapture the accounts already paid via the percentage over the base rent. Let's talk about lease terms. Negotiate a lease term for at least 5 to 10 years to control your fixed cost. Negotiate a lease term for at least 5 to 10 years to control your fixed costs. In addition to the lease term, buyers should also negotiate options which are lease renewals. Ideally, you'll want to negotiate 2 to 3 options of 3 to 5 years to extend the lease as beneficial to the operation of your restaurant. It's also beneficial to have these shorter elements to the lease in case things go south to permit you to exit if necessary. Additionally, options allow you further control your lease costs, as the options are usually tied to CPI increases, unless you have a provision indicating that the option will be negotiated based on then current market rents. You'll want to try and avoid the market rent formula, since the amount will typically be higher, leaving you without certainty and the benefit of a fixed. If you'd like a complimentary restaurant valuation, contact us today. If you are interested in selling your restaurant, Mission Peak Brokers can help. We're highly experienced, knowledgeable about restaurant business sales, including bars, cafes, nightclubs, etc. We have closed numerous eatery business sales in the Bay Area. We have represented sellers and buyers. In addition to business sales, we also provided commercial real estate sales, business commercial financing. Contact us today for additional information. Thank you.